morning, Roger. How you doing?
I'm doing great today. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to have you on the show. You've got quite the track record, and we were introduced by a mutual friend that worked for you a long time ago. And there's so many different ways we can go because of the different journeys and the different ventures you've had and been a part of. But for the listeners that don't know a bunch about your background, maybe take us back to when you decided to become an entrepreneur or didn't, and how you ended up getting into it for your first venture.
Well, actually, I was 15 or 16 years old, and a friend and I started a lifeguarding and swimming instruction company. In Orange County, they were building out these homeowners associations with 500-600 homes in each neighborhood. And they had to do swimming instruction and lifeguarding, and they didn't know how to do it. So we'd offer that, and we had an insurance policy, believe it or not, and that was our big sales pitch. If you don't hire us, you're uninsured. If you get an insurance policy, you got to hire your own lifeguards, and you don't know how to hire lifeguards. And so we were water safety instructors from the Red Cross, and so we ostensibly knew how to do that. We were trained to be lifeguards and swimming instructors. So that grew to be like 23, 24 employees. I mean, it wasn't a small little thing. It wasn't a junior achievement company, which I'm not knocking junior achievement. It's a great thing for young people to do. But I remember at graduation in high school, and this is when the whole budget for college freshman year was $3,000, right? Mm-hmm. This young woman got a $1,000 scholarship from Bank of America for running this junior achievement company that grossed like $224. And I'm thinking, wait a second, we did like $4,000. I mean, what's up with this? So anyway, so it was clearly kind of in my blood. But curiously, then I went to college and I wanted to be a doctor. And I think it was still the independence that attracted me to that. That once I got that qualification, that certification, I could kind of hang up my own shingle and I could make my own hours, and then, I could kind of not have a boss. Mm-hmm. Not that I was, that opposed to having bosses. I had a lot of jobs in my youth, and I didn't mind having bosses. But it's that ability to, make money with your own business, so that you're in control. Mm-hmm. It just removed a lot of randomness from my life. So that was my goal. But then when I transferred from UC Irvine to UC Berkeley, I got diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, and I only had what appeared to be about a 20% chance of living. So it kind of put a stick in the spokes of that bicycle ride. I decided to switch majors to computer science because I'd gotten some indications from some medical school board friends that I wasn't going to get in because no one wanted someone to die on them in medical school. So they just wanted to give the seat to somebody who had a better chance of getting through. These people told me, well, why don't you just go get a master's degree, get a job, or, buy a car, date a girl, go to the movies, do something for a couple of years after you graduate. And then if you haven't relapsed, then apply. But, your numbers right now don't look too good. But a couple of years from now, if you're relapse free, the numbers would be a lot different. So anyway, that's what
that's motivating. My gosh.
Yeah, I don't know if any of that is legal anymore. I mean, I don't think but it was a long time ago. It was the 70s. It was before the Bakke decision. And then.
So how did you keep your motivation when you were going through all that stuff?
Well, the whole thing about having cancer for me, I mean, different people react to it differently, but for me, it was, okay, here's a life and death fight, and I'm going to fight. I was a pre-med, and I had taken biochemistry and organic chemistry and general chemistry. I knew a lot about biology and cell biology. And so I really dug into what Hodgkin's disease was and studied up on it. I found the guy who wrote the textbook and was working on the cure, and he was at Stanford. And I bought his book and started reading it and got into his clinic, and he treated me. He and his staff of like 40 or 50 doctors, they had the world's best treatment center. We're just 40-minute drive down the road from Berkeley. It was just a miracle. I mean, it's just a remarkable coincidence.
Wow.
So what happened, I think, was over the next several years, as I switched to computer science, because I knew I could get a job doing that. Okay, I knew I could write computer programs, and I knew I knew that that paid. I discovered that, databases weren't very mature yet. And actually application development for simple applications like payroll or, inventory or whatever just wasn't done very well yet. And so this business of surviving cancer and building better software products and better software development tools and starting a company, and it all became sort of a life or death thing. So those three things: graduating from college, actually successfully graduating. Well, my scholarships ran out because I had to do a fifth year because of the switch of majors. So my fourth and fifth year was all about computer science, but I had to work full time that fifth year. So I almost flunked out trying to hold down a full-time job and major in computer science at UC Berkeley. But I succeeded, but I had nightmares for years later. And now I'm starting to wonder if it was some form of PTSD or something like that. because the radiation therapy, was 4 months long, and there was a major surgery in the middle of it. And then I had 7 months of chemotherapy. Jeez. And that was the harsh chemotherapy back in the day. And the anti-nausea agents weren't very good. So, I won't go into the details. I don't want your listeners to all hang up. But 13 months of, if you think about it, a prisoner of war, you think you're going to die. And so, I thought I was going to die. And you're getting tortured every day. Yeah, I was getting tortured every day. So it's pretty much the same thing.
While trying to graduate high school or college.
College, yeah. So I'm trying to get my bachelor's degree.
And working.
But, I was learning so much, and it was just so exciting to be young, frankly. And I wasn't relapsing. I got through the treatment, and a year went by, another year went by, and all of a sudden I thought, my God, I've got a chance. And so I wasn't going to waste that chance. I mean, I was very busy during those few years, and I just stayed very busy. And so whether it was trying to keep the company afloat, while I was putting payroll on my visa and trying to build our first database product, and, having a few loyal friends that I hired early on, doing whatever it took to try to get this product out when we had no investors, because no one would invest in me, because I was 24 when I started this company. And back then that was considered too young. Nowadays it's no big deal, but everything became a life and death matter for me, which I'm not sure was a good thing, but a lot of people attribute my success as an entrepreneur to the, take no prisoners. We're gonna succeed or die trying approach to run.
It's interesting because, with staring death in the face, you've probably got a little bit different perspective of risk than everybody else.
Yeah, well, not a whole lot intimidated me.
Yeah, right. Sure, I'll take out a 30-year loan. Give it to me.
Yeah. Well, I play poker sometimes now, poker tournaments, and when people try to bluff me, because I'm usually the oldest guy at the table these days, and I'm thinking, son, if you had any idea how useless it is to try to intimidate me.
That's awesome. So maybe for the listeners that don't know a ton about databases, or what was the business, and then what were you trying to accomplish when you said database management? I know a couple other ventures all kind of stem throughout some of your experience, but what were you trying to solve? And then did you start with a plan in the end in mind? Because your exits are all very similar on some of the first three companies.
That's a good question. Well, there were some software products being sold by companies, and I think the first software company to go public was a database management system software company, Culinet. But all these database systems were originally written for very large mainframe computers, and in the 70s there was a new thing. There was the mini computer, and instead of a computer costing $5 million or something, these computers sold for 100,000, 200,000, 300,000. And then there was a new breed of computers coming out that were multi-user computers, but only sold for tens of thousands. And so I wrote a simpler database management system that was easier for people to use and ran well on these smaller machines. And that was the target. There was a new operating system called the Unix operating system, which I targeted my product for that operating system. And it was as much about promoting the Unix operating system as it was about promoting our flavor of database management system. But it was after I designed it, I discovered other people had designed a similar sort of system, and it was called the relational data model, the relational database management system. And that was the basis for other companies like Oracle, Sybase, Ingress. And, all those companies did well. We all went public. Oracle went public 3 years before Informix did. Informix was my company. And they started 3 years before we did. I'm sorry, they only went public maybe about a year before we did, but they started 3 years before we did. And we each doubled in size every year. So, wow. We'd go from 50 employees to 100 employees, but they were going from, 300 employees to 600 employees, so we were always 1/8 their size. Because of the 3 years of doubling that they got to do.
That's crazy.
Before we got going. So that was always our battle, how to survive in the shadow of Oracle. And, that company's huge to this day. Larry Ellison's the richest man in California. So I kind of came in second in a field of a lot of competitors, but they were so much bigger the whole time.
What was the goal? I mean, did you think that going public was was that your intentions, or what was was there a lot of mergers and acquisitions going on at the same time? I mean, what was the landscape, and what were you guys marching towards every day?
Yeah, well, like most entrepreneurs, and I criticize people for this now, but I didn't have a great plan when I started it. What I knew is this: I knew that writing computer programs from scratch, from specifications that, I worked at Bechtel Engineering as a contract programmer while I was finishing my bachelor's degree at Berkeley. And, I got paid at first $6 an hour, then $9 an hour, then $12 an hour, then $23 an hour once they figured out that I was like one of the few people around that could do the project that they really needed done. And I thought, well, $23 an hour is great. Back then, that was a lot of money. But this database management system that I purchased on behalf of Bechtel from Hewlett Packard to go with their mini computer, they paid $10,000 for this piece of software. And so these guys at Hewlett Packard wrote this software product once, and now they're selling it $10,000 a pop. So they're making money. That software group at Hewlett Packard is making money not based on how many hours they work. It's based on how many of these reels of tape they can sell.
Right.
And the reel of tape only costs like $12, and they're selling it, for 10 grand. So that profit margin appealed to me.
Ding, 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 right?
Yeah, right. So I'm thinking, well, if I could write a database management system for one of these smaller computers, and there were a lot of companies popping up in Silicon Valley to build these smaller, there were microcomputers. The IBM PC was coming out, and there were microcomputers before that from smaller companies than IBM. And these were called super microcomputers because you could have 8 users or 20 users using the same computer. Now we call them servers, but there were a lot of companies, like dozens, coming out with computers that would run the Unix operating system, but they had no software at all. So it made the opportunity available for companies to build software products to run on these Unix-based computers, whereas Hewlett Packard had their computer, they had their own operating system, not Unix, they had their own database management system. So I thought, well, if I could build a database management system that could run across lots of different brands of computers and sell them for thousands of dollars a copy, then shoot, all we have to do is sell enough per year, like maybe 100 of them or something in a year, and we can break even. And then the next year, if we sell 200 of them, we're making all kinds of money. So it was the profit leverage that attracted me to the business opportunity. I didn't have time to think it through in terms of, how much cash will it take to hire the people to build the product, to ship the version 1 before we, and then invoice people, and then 30, 60, 90 days before we get paid. I had no idea. Yeah. I had no idea how to analyze cash flow. And so I got my former girlfriend, I had broken up with her, to invest $20,000 in the company for 10% of the company. And I thought, well, that should do it. Didn't come anywhere close. But miraculously, over the 3 or 4 years there while I was building the product, we only had to raise like $340,000 total, but it was a lot more than 20. And that stock got sold very inexpensively. And so those people the angel investors that got me going, which was an enormous risk for them, so they deserved the 100-fold or whatever they got. But They got an enormous multiple return on that investment. But it was really building that company brick by brick, literally putting payroll on my visa, going to sleep every night thinking we're going to be broke by the morning.
Well, I'm curious, Roger, like that was around the time where, Basic was coming out, right? Where it wasn't that, Gates and all those guys, or everybody's kind of got the software hardware battle going on. And correct me if I'm wrong, isn't that somewhere around those times where?
Yeah, no, it absolutely was. It was the fire in the valley, early software industry days. But, Microsoft succeeded for the same reason, that all of a sudden there were these microcomputers, and the hardware companies building the microcomputers usually didn't build much software to go with them. Mm-hmm. So you had, then in Microsoft's case, they had IBM building the PC, and then Compaq came out with a clone. Then a lot of other companies came out with PC clones, PC compatible. And they had lots of hardware manufacturers building platforms for software products that the hardware companies were not providing. So, it's kind of like literally someone inventing the printing press, and you happen to know how to write books. I mean, the guy who invented the printing press, or people that build printing presses, that doesn't guarantee there's going to be any books, right?
Right.
So all of a sudden, there were several companies, in Microsoft, Informix, Oracle, that could build software. And there were, computers being sold that had no software on them. So it was an opportunity to create an industry, really, is what the exciting part of it was. Because prior to that, IBM sold the computer and IBM sold the software. And, it took an antitrust decree to get it so that IBM had to allow other software companies to sell software for IBM computers. But with Digital Equipment and Hewlett Packard and Data General, all these mini computer companies, they all sold their own software as well. So the pattern was continuing, and there wasn't an opportunity for much of an independent software industry until you had generic operating systems like MS-DOS and then Windows, and on multi-user computers, the Unix operating system. And it was that opportunity of the generic operating system that ran across dozens of brands of computers. That's what created the software industry. And that was the opportunity I spotted, actually. It wasn't as much the opportunity of a better database system, or, programming in the C programming language, or the technical aspects of Unix itself. It was the fact that it was an operating system that was going to run across lots of different brands of computers, and the creation of the generic software industry.
That is so exciting. I mean, I've read some of these books, and I don't know if you ever heard of the Innovators book, and then, the Jobs, and a couple of these documentaries. So like that whole space, it's just crazy to think that you were right in the run and mix with all these people. And as you're watching all these companies go public, is that how you decided to go that route? Or was it something that, like, what led you that direction, and how, just kind of, what was the process like?
Right. Well, that seemed like a miracle to me. I mean, after we shipped the product and we're starting to have some revenue, and very quickly the product was, the whole strategy was quite successful, quite correct. All of a sudden we were positive cash flow and growing really fast. Then that begged the question, how can I finally get some money out of this? Because I was broke when I started it. Mm-hmm. And really, I was starving. I was just starving for some cash. So I looked at different types of exits, and there were some software companies getting acquired. And I was just hoping to God some public software company would want to buy a database company. I was hoping ASK or something like that, some company that was started even before us, that was 3 years ahead of us, that, had gone public and had a lot of revenue and profits. I was just hoping they would buy us for $10 or something million, $20 million. And then we doubled in size again, and we actually did get an offer from 3Com for 10 to 13 million, somewhere in that range. And, I had one guy on my board who was savvy enough to say, no, this company's worth more than that. Your revenues are $5 million going to $10 million. No way we're going to sell this company for 1x next year's revenues.
Right.
And so I had no idea about how to use metrics like multiples of revenues or multiples of earnings. So I just took his word for it, and we were cash flow positive. So I wasn't scared of going broke anymore. And I really saw the opportunity of, I mean, it was all working. I mean, when you have a plan and the plan starts working, you get a lot braver.
Right. That's awesome. It's not life or death anymore. Now it's just like, what's the plan?
Yeah. Fear melts away and greed takes over. I mean, it's just one of those two forces. It's either fear or greed that drive pretty much everything. And so we started getting greedy, and I just thought we were going to sell for a bigger number. I was thinking maybe we could sell for 30 million or 40 million something. But then an investment banker came by and it would, watch Oracle go public and had just taken Adobe public or was in the process of doing that. And really, there weren't that many public software companies. So it wasn't like I was watching dozens of software companies go public. There were only a handful. And she wanted to take us public right after Adobe. So we were doing 20 million on our way to 40 when that happened. And, it doesn't sound like much money now. Back then, that was quite a bit. And software companies in general went public when they were a bit smaller than they do now. Because of the Sarbanes-Oxley and all this other stuff makes it so you really have to be kind of a $100 million company to go public now. And 20 million back then, that would be about a 50 or $60 million company today probably. But,
and you were making money, which is different than a lot of companies today too.
Yeah, I think we had 10 consecutive quarters of profit and growth.
Wow.
It was just unheard of. But it was still a small company to go public. And so we did a small initial public offering in September 86, I think it was. And then I think it was February of the next year or so. It wasn't very long afterward. We did a second public offering at like over twice the value.
Wow. So, what did you learn through that process that took you and accelerated you in the rest of your journey? Because I mean, I know we don't have enough time on the show to talk about like every single facet of this, but I mean, what were some of the big takeaways as you learned it? What was it like working for a public company? Because you had mentioned that you said you wanted the control and the freedom and less randomness, but now you're owned by the public where everybody's got an opinion. So like, what was that like in that process, and then how did it change after the fact?
Well, with regard to Informix, which was my first, it was a little bit terrifying because it was a game I didn't know. I was unfamiliar with it, and I was still young. I was 30 years old. I was 24 when I started the company. I was 30 when I took it public. And, I didn't understand very well what the Wall Street analyst job was and what games they played and how they tried to freak you out and figure out whether, call you and try to figure out whether you're having a good quarter or a bad quarter. And then sometimes they would just write that you were having a bad quarter. They'd put out an analyst report predicting, putting out a sell on you and predicting some, because, the product's not selling as well, or people aren't signing up for their next year of maintenance contract or whatever. They just make stuff up sometimes. and I couldn't believe what was going on. And a lot of these analysts kept telling me that, you're too small. Oracle's too big. You got to start doing a lot of acquisitions. You got to catch up in size, which I don't think was ever actually true. We always competed with them well just by having great products and great service. And we could have done that forever. But yeah, I sort of flinched. I listened to too much of this nonsense. And yeah, the stock price would go up and down totally independent of things that I did. And I did not like that. The other thing I didn't like was that when I did try to liquidate, there were these lawyers that would sue you if your stock fell after you sold. Whether, and accuse you of fraud, accuse you of knowing that your stock was going to fall. And it's very hard to defend yourself. And they were called strike suits. They were nuisance suits. They had no basis. And usually the insurance company would pay them off. And so that was a very unsettling experience to get sued for absolutely nothing and have to go through a big defense process. But, after I survived all that and worked my way out of Informix. I hired a CEO, and then I stayed on as chairman for a few years. And then finally I left because I was getting too many business plans in the mail. A lot of people had a lot of companies they wanted me to invest in and sit on their board. And there were just opportunities all over the place. Every manual process needed a software product automated. It wasn't just payroll and inventory anymore. It was everything, customer support, sales automation, marketing automation. So everything a business did pretty much needed a software product. So my VP of engineering wanted to start a company, so I gave him some money and helped him with his ideas. And we started Vantive Software, which was one of the first customer relationship management software products. And then while I was chairman of that company, I started a company called Visagenic Software, which Didn't do well at first. We kind of had a misdirection in our initial products, but then we acquired a company that had what became one of the first application servers. And we pioneered the three-tier computing model, which is massively dominant today. Every major web application has an application server in it. So that was all exciting stuff. I mean, it was just the Wild West. I mean, and I never knew when it was going to stop. You know, when are you going to turn around and all the problems that need to be solved with software have been solved? You know, and there are no more entrepreneurial opportunities in enterprise software. You know, so I never knew when, you know, the merry-go-round would stop spinning and there were no more brass rings to grab. So you just kept going. You just kept starting companies and invested in companies and kept, you know, running after it with your hair on fire.
So what was it like with Informix? I mean, you know, I think software, you know, there's a lot of entrepreneurs where they look at their businesses like their babies because they create it and then there's a reflection of themselves. And, you know, from really big, you know, huge conglomerates all the way down to the small shop kind of entrepreneurs have that same kind of feel. And with software, I do believe it's even slightly different because code and what you're building is literally like a piece of artwork. Was it tough going through that with Informix? And then how did your perception of that change with some of the other ventures?
Yeah, well, to a large degree, it was kind of my baby. And you're right. I mean, it's authorship. I mean, I do creative writing now. I mean, I write poetry books. I write, working on a novel, a screenplay and stuff. And you write these things and, you know, it's your baby. You go to a workshop and other people read it and they tell you what they think about it. And sometimes they didn't understand it. They didn't like it the way, and the best part they didn't like. And, you know, you kind of,
Yeah.
so it is kind of your baby. And it was the same way with software. And it was an artistic activity, especially the code I wrote. I wrote a lot of comments. I wrote a very highly stylized form of the C programming language. It was very clear when other people read it, and no other programmers that I know write code that way. They don't really care about the next guy who comes along and tries to read it. But, you know, I was there 13 years, so it wore off mostly. I mean, I still consider it my baby. I still remember Informix very fondly, but the product itself, you know, the engineers, the really great engineers I hired later, I said, well, you know, this part of the code is still doing this, you know, but when I do this, it doesn't do that. And they go, well, we rewrote that code a long time ago. And I go, you rewrote my code? What are you talking about? So, you know, that was like year 4 or 5, you know, so I was still very proud of products we invented and types of products. You know, we invented languages. So not only did we use programming languages, but we invented query languages, report writing languages, 4th generation languages to create new software. So I'm still very proud of the fact that not only did I use language, but I invented language. And that was a lot of fun and very fulfilling. So after a while, you know, and times changed. So the graphical user interface came out, you know, Windows and the Mac, and the languages we created were designed for dumb terminals that didn't have mice and pull down menus and stuff like that. So they became obsolete. So you have to, after a while, you have to take pride in the fact that you built a piece of art that was appropriate and perfect for the time that you created it. And that helps you leave it behind. Frankly.
Point. Yeah. No, I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. I mean, it was a bridge, a stepping stone in the spectrum of time.
Yeah. And so anyway, I was disappointed though that, you know, I couldn't stay at Informix forever. I mean, the pressures of being public and the ups and downs and the mistakes I made. I did make some mistakes later on. I acquired a company that wasn't really a great move because I was responding to the pressure of Wall Street that we should just get bigger for bigger sake. And I wish I, you know, had made those mistakes and that I could still be there running that company, because that would have been great. And back in the day, before my day, you know, when Hewlett and Packard started HP and the Intel guys, you know, they ran those companies forever. They you know, they died running those companies. They retired out of them. And that wasn't true for my era. It could have been. I mean, looking back on it, I could have taken that route, but I didn't know it. I didn't know that to be true at the time. So I think there's really 2 ways to do this entrepreneuring thing. One is to, you know, you referred to them as lifestyle companies, but that might not necessarily be true. I mean, I've met some very rich people that started a fire hydrant company. I mean, they're just very good at it, right? They're just good at running businesses, and they grow them up, and maybe they don't take them public. I think one of the richest women in America runs the software company that builds the Epic systems that runs hospitals, and runs like I think most of the hospitals in the U.S. So sometimes I think maybe I should have done it that way, but the ideas were popping so fast, and there was so much opportunity for growth, and it was hair on fire growth, and so you needed to raise a lot of money. You needed to go to the venture capital community in order to get the fuel for that growth. And then you had venture capital partnerships that owned the majority of your company, and they were, 5-year, 7-year, maybe 10-year long partnerships. But after a while, they want to get their liquidity because they want to close that partnership and move on to, the next partnership. Sequoia 8 goes to Sequoia 9, right? And they have to dissolve everything in Sequoia 8. So after realizing that, I was sort of entrepreneuring in this era where you're a cog in this bigger machine of how companies are started and built and then taken public and or sold. I realized, well, that's sort of my destiny. But looking back on it, I think if I had to do over again with perfect hindsight, if I'd had some money, so I wouldn't have to sell so much of Informix, or if I would have just accepted the stock options my board was trying to give me. When I was getting burnt out on being CEO and making mistakes and stuff, I wanted to step down as CEO. I wanted to hire someone else, but my board wanted me to stay on. And they've been trying to give me stock options for the past 3 or 4 years. And I kept saying, well, no, I got my founder stock. I thought that's how it should work, but I don't know why the hell I thought that. At the same time, Larry Ellison was demanding all sorts of stock options from his board, and he ended up growing his percentage ownership of the company, I think. But anyway, I ended up owning too little of it to make it a company where I could be forever, given all the other opportunities around me. It turns out my board was right. I should have let them give me stock options in the company so that I was gaining percentage ownership, so that I felt more invested. That it was more my baby still.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because there's a lot of these entrepreneurs these days that they're public, but they still call most of the shots. I mean, if you look at what Bezos, Elon, and those guys are doing, I mean, they just totally ignore what all the shareholders and people are saying, and they've got this playground of this enormous platform and cash flow that they just kind of get to do what they want with.
Yeah, well, things went from where they doubled in size every year to where they went up tenfold in a year or more. So the social networking thing was a completely different metric and completely different growth multiple that I've ever seen before. And so that generation, I'm really jealous of that generation, because all of a sudden the B word started getting tossed around early and often. All these unicorns, companies worth billions, entrepreneurs worth billions, and before they even go public. And that's just so foreign to me. I mean, I feel like Babe Ruth, who got was the highest paid ball player and got $20,000 or something. Right. And actually, when Informix went public, the whole company was only worth $54 million. I mean, I've participated in rounds of investing where the round was $100 million for 10% of a company or something like that. So the numbers are just very different now than they were in the 80s.
Well, and maybe that's an interesting segue into the different ventures that you were investing in, because you've been an active investor in lots of companies, whether it was the VP of engineering or all these other companies over the decades. What's your perception of business value? Because you went through your whole Informix journey, but then when you flip the switch and you're looking at it from an investor's perspective, and right before we jumped on the call, we were talking about perceived value and growing enterprise value. And so how did you look at these other companies, and what would attract you to certain investments or certain companies versus others? And then what do you think that certain companies are doing these days to continue that value creation that is maybe affecting those numbers?
Well, I think the two fundamental things has been and probably always will be growth and profitability. So, if you can, let's pick sort of a middle number, used to be the top numbers back in the day, but Informix, we were growing at 100% a year. So our revenue would go from 20 million to 40 million, from 40 million to 80 million. And we had about 20% profit before tax. So both of those were great numbers. It was sort of maximum growth that Wall Street would give you credit for. If you grew faster than 100%, they would kind of like discount it, like, well, that isn't going to last. And the profitability was a really great before tax profitability percentage. So they could do math on that. They could say, okay, 5 years from now, what could this company be worth? And, that large multiple of value, if they were paying 40 times earnings, they could figure out, okay, what will the earnings be 5 years from now? Given that growth rate will slow down, the profit margins will probably shrink, but still, it'll go down, at a reasonable pace from here as they get to be a bigger company. And so they could sort of value what the stock price could be, and it could be 5x, 10x out 5 years. And so good long-term investors would make that bet. When the growth rates started going to, 10-fold a year or 30-fold a year or 50-fold a year, I mean, some of these social networking companies, the numbers did that for their first few years. It just became very hard to value. And so people started having to go to other kinds of metrics, like how much, the total available market for selling ads from a web browser, sort of became the thing people had to measure. And if we only have two players, we've had two players going to be left, Google and Yahoo, what's going to be the total available market and how are they going to divide that up? So all of a sudden they started using different metrics, but and got to much bigger numbers, and they turned out to be right. I mean, I got to say, I just didn't see all that coming. I didn't participate well in that era of the software industry.
Because you were investing in other companies too. So, even though you said you didn't participate in some of these other ones, I mean, you were participating in other companies that you were investing in. What were you looking at with these owners? What were they doing? I mean, was it just growth and profitability? And did the interaction with Wall Street and going public and looking at value change how you perceived other people's companies?
Yeah, it did. Because, it wasn't just going public, but it was also all these companies got bought after we went public. Informix, Visagenic, Vantiv went public and then got acquired. And so I got to see how other entities value a company. I got to see how the Wall Street mutual fund managers value a company when they decide whether to buy your IPO stock or not, whether to buy you after your earnings report comes out. I got to see how larger companies value smaller companies. And when I invested then in startups, I had the perspective that usually the entrepreneur doesn't have, unfortunately, and I didn't have it when I started my first company. Like I said, to ask myself, okay, how big can this company grow to be? So is this product the kind of product where you can grow revenue? You can, first of all, the dog's going to eat the dog food. Does anybody want this product at all? So that's sort of the first screen. But after you get past that, yes, people will buy this product. They have customers already. Okay, then, are they selling it to, is it a product for all medical offices or is it just for dentists? Well, okay, it's just for dentists, but is that still a pretty big market? Well, okay, but is it just for orthodontists? And what does it do for them? Does it just do billing or does it do those things? So, I sort of learned how to size a market and how to look at a company and say, how many of these can they possibly sell before they saturate their market? And then actually, more importantly, and this I think I was better at looking at than other investors, these entrepreneurs, okay, this is their first product. What other products can they develop or acquire? I mean, are these people going to build a big company here one way or another? Mm-hmm. So if a group of people had a successful product and they were selling more and more of it every day, and it looked like they could do that for the next several years, and they were smart and they were scrappy and they were hustling and they wanted to build a big company, well, then I kind of believed that they were going to build a big company. So then the market share of their first products didn't matter as much as investing in the team. And that's how I played the investment game when I was playing it. A combination of sort of the product, the marketplace that they're trying to sell it in, how big and how receptive is that market, how long will the sales cycles be? How fast can they grow? And then how good is this team? How big a company can they build?
Well, I think you hit on a bunch of really good points, and one that I think a lot of people don't do enough of attention to is like you said, looking at the different angles from a buyer's perspective, but then also when you mentioned the team, I think there's a lot of people out there that might have a really amazing product or service, something like that, but somehow they can't formalize the team, and then all those amazing numbers kind of are irrelevant.
Yeah, they're when you're investing, they are, but you have to be able to visualize them getting bigger, because at the end of the day, when the company gets acquired or goes public, their valuation is going to be based on those numbers. Mm-hmm. So, how big are the numbers? How fast are they growing? And what kind of profitability is in those numbers? And, nowadays, there's companies, again, every few years you can go public without being profitable, right? And we're in that era again right now. Mm-hmm. And I think that's fine, because some companies that could be profitable, particularly with the software as a service revenue model, you sell a bunch of software, but you don't get to book that as revenue because it gets paid to you ratably over the next 3 years. So you have a lot of deferred revenue, and a company gets valued on the combination of its revenue and deferred revenue. So you can be unprofitable and go public again. And I think that's okay, especially if you're in a market that's a huge market and it's a land grab situation where either you're going to get that market share or your competitors are. So you have to raise money and spend it to go get that market share while it's still a land grab market. So, the profitability thing, measuring companies on profitability, obviously in the social networking area in particular, where these companies are just losing billions of dollars. Sometimes you have to ignore what their profits are currently, and you have to forecast out what their profitability can be when they decide they want to be profitable.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, it's interesting when you're in how you articulated how all that kind of combines together. But when you get the land grab and you get different things that are happening that allow that stuff to actually be part of the mechanics of the game. When you've been introducing yourself as a potential investor to some of these people, I mean, what are you seeing? What are some of the biggest red flags that you see people doing that they shouldn't, that they should think about differently? Or, what are some of the things that you've seen that haven't gone as well based on the different ventures you've gone into?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me clarify. I'm not really actively investing in new companies right now. I'm in the phase of my life where I'm trying to find all my money. I invest in companies I've already got investments in at this point. I'm just trying to bring a lot of these companies around to maturity and resolution, either going public or getting bought. But when I was an active investor, the mistakes I made, there were several mistakes of omission where it was a good opportunity and going to be a good company, and I didn't invest. So I've got a few of those. There's one venture capital firm, I think it's Bessemer, but I'm not sure. They've got a great write-up of all the huge opportunities they missed and why they missed them. It's really funny. But the ones where I did invest, sometimes I lost my discipline, and I caved in and invested in companies that were just totally trendy. When the internet first got going, the internet boom, anything with a .com on the end of it. Mm-hmm. And, so I invested in a few companies that were tantamount to the, frozen trucks delivering dog food. If you jumble all the great internet losers together, there was Webvan that, was the frozen truck company that people see other investors about now. And the delivering dog food, where it turned out dog food was too heavy to deliver. And I guess Amazon's going to make it work anyway. But
I've got my dog food on Subscribe and Save. So they figured it out. Yeah. I don't know how they do it, but I get my 40 pounds of dog food for under cost delivered at my door every month.
Somehow that works. I don't know. I think that's one that's going to work for a while until the investors decide they're done pouring money.
They want actually to have profitability.
A lot of these companies are still subsidized, I think, by hope. But I made as many of those kinds of mistakes as anybody. you got to make sure a company's going to, at least in the enterprise software business, you got to make sure that they're going to get their next round. That's the difficulty. A lot of investments I made sort of died after the A round. We just couldn't get the B round. So the analysis I did, putting in the angel money or the preferred A money, just wasn't accurate enough. When it came time to raise money from real venture capital firms, I just ran sort of large angel funds of 10 million or 20 million. But if you want to go get a $5 million round from or $10 million round from two firms or whatever where they're managing 300 or 400 million, now they're managing billions. Back then, it was the average fund was probably 200 or 300 million. You had to be right. You had to be right about that market size opportunity, because now you had to help the entrepreneurs put together a slideshow that said, okay, we got this product. It's exciting. We've got a big market potential. The customers are buying it. The dogs are eating the dog food. We just need money to make more dog food. But, if they weren't really there yet, if they were missing one of those categories, like the product wasn't quite done yet, well, that's not going to happen. You're not going to get a preferred B during most of the time that I was an investor. If the customers are buying it, but the reference calls were, lukewarm, you're not going to get a preferred B. If the pipeline, if the sales pipeline isn't 5 times as big or 10 times as big as the number of companies you've already sold to. So that it was just tough. There were eras there with 4 or 5 years where it was just tough to get the next round of funding done.
As you kind of switch from, working and being that serial entrepreneur in Informix and some of these other ones and switch to investors, how was it, was there enough going on where it was easy to have your kind of identity change? Because I know a lot of people struggle with that when they say, hey, what do you do? A lot of entrepreneurs after they sell, whether it's just, their one-time business. I mean, how did you dynamically change your personality? Did you deal with any struggles? I mean, it sounds like you got a lot of hobbies right now with the writing and the poetry and stuff like that, but, was it easy to adapt that, or, how did you kind of go through that evolution?
Well, it was an evolution. So I was just solely an operating executive in my 30s, late 20s and 30s. So I started Informix when I was 24, and took it public when I was 30 in 1986, and ran it until 90 or so, and then around 92, 93, I left the company. So I invested in Vantiv in 90, and so that was sort of the beginning of my investing career. So I did both in the 90s. I both, was sort of chairman. Nowadays, you'd maybe call it executive chairman for a while at Vantiv. So that was a little bit of operations, but not as much as I probably should have done, frankly, in retrospect. But then I also started Visogenic while Vantiv was still private. So I was both an investor and a board sitter and an operating executive when I started Visogenic, and then I ran that company and took it public. So I was, I think, an operating executive at that company for 5 or 6 years, while I was also investing. So I brought on a partner, Jackie McDonald, and we formed Sippl McDonald Ventures. And she was reading all the business plans while I was an operating executive, and then bringing me in right before, she is making a decision she wanted to invest. And then, so when we took Visogenic public and sold it, that was sort of the end of my operating career. Then I had children, and they needed my time, and my company, and my wife told me, new company, new wife. Because being a leader of a public company was just too demanding while trying to raise children. At least it was for me and my family. I mean, every family is different, but I don't want to tell anybody how to live their life with regard to raising their family. But for me, it was just too tough. My kids were too much of a handful. And so then the investing life was okay, because I got back to that goal, right? I was making my own hours. Mm-hmm. I don't want to meet with a company. I turn down the meeting. If I want to be busier, I make more investments. So that was the right lifestyle for me during that time. So I don't regret not being an operating executive during my 40s or 50s.
Mm-hmm.
But now I kind of do because, I wanted to be an executive again, but there was too big of a gap from my last successful operating role. So it was hard to sign on as a CEO of a public company. CEOs of public companies get paid quite a bit these days. So I actually did want to do that a few years ago. And I found it that people just, I made it to the last round of interviews a couple of times, but they wanted to see more recent operating experience. And so usually went to someone who was currently had a CEO job or a head of a division job. But I do spend my time still in the advisor role, which is probably the appropriate role for me these days anyway, where I sit on people's boards. So I'm still on 4 or 5 boards. I'm trying to get on more public company boards. So I'm on one public company board, Imperva Software, a security software company. And that's fun for me because it's sort of a culmination of all of my work in enterprise software. Because when people hack you, when they attack you, where do they go? I mean, they go to the database, they go to the application server.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm on the board of a company who builds software to defend all the software that I built in my career.
That's awesome.
So that's kind of fun. And I'm actively looking for another public board seat.
Well, and I think you got an interesting note there, because a lot of entrepreneurs, after they're done, they don't know what to do. And, I think they're always looking for the rush, and they may just invest in something just to be a part of something when they, I think the advisory role on the boards is an interesting way to get exposure to that without maybe the risk and or the time constraints. I mean, it sounds like, you've been able to satisfy some of the yearning that you have with that.
That's right. And it's really rewarding too. I was on a board of a company in Provo, Utah, called Jive Communications. It's not Jive Software of San Francisco. Jive Communications is a voice over IP company. And, it was really rewarding to help these fine young people, hardworking, honest as day is long, just great young people who really wanted, some advice and some guidance. Not that they weren't doing great all on their own, but just some perspective, things they worried about where I told them they didn't have to worry about that, and things they weren't worried about where I alerted them maybe you ought to look into that a little more. Mm-hmm. It just gave them, more confidence and more peace of mind. And they were grateful, and the company did well. We sold it for, I guess I'm not supposed to say how much, but we had a really good exit. And that was very rewarding. And I enjoyed that. It wasn't a public company. I was kind of hoping they would go public so I could have another public board seat. But they were in the size range of a public company. So it was a great experience, and I would do that again. And like I said, being on another public board would be a lot of fun, particularly if they've got a CEO who's a first-time CEO at a public company.
So, with all the different things that you've experienced, and I know we talked about a bunch of stuff, is there one thing that you want to maybe highlight for the listeners that haven't gone through things, or, haven't exited, haven't, really gone through the entire transition and in their life stages? One thing that maybe you want to highlight, or if we, missed something that you want to make sure that we put in there, what would it be?
Well, if someone's just starting a company, I would encourage them to, start a company that's really good. start a company you'd be willing to spend the rest of your life with, if that's the way it went. And then, somewhere along the line, decide what your life plan is. And the earlier you do it, the better. But if you want to start a company and be with that company until you retire, design it that way in terms of investors and investments and growth strategies. And on the other hand, if the nature of the company or the nature of the industry is such that that's not really possible, you're going to have to lose control early and by raising a lot of money. Well, settle in with that, but know that, you're probably on one of those two tracks, and build the value that you want to build according to which track you get on. But then on a personal front, I would say, you touched on, some people, and, you've interviewed 100 people on this topic. So maybe some of these people, after they were done selling their company, maybe they do have some sort of seller's remorse, or, oh my God, what am I going to do now sort of thing. And I'm in my early 60s. And so, you know, a lot of my friends are trying to figure out their retirement strategies and stuff. And some don't have great retirement strategies. So in terms of what are they going to do now? So I encourage people to live a well-rounded life. You know, I never had a shortage of things to do. I never woke up and said, "Oh my God, I don't have a darn thing to do today." You know, I always had 5 careers, 10 careers I wanted to do. You know, if it wasn't be a doctor, it was be in the software industry. If it wasn't that, you know, be a counselor, be a teacher, be a professor, be a airplane pilot, be a you know, just a professional writer, you know, a poet, a novelist, a journalist. So there's all these things that I've always wanted to do and could have done as a career, but yeah, I had to pick one. Right? I had to pick a path, and it turns out, you know, not really. I mean, you can kind of in your semi-retirement, you can pick a different career. You get to do something that you always wanted to do, and just go do it, and just go do it as if you were a pro at it.
I think that's, find some passion and a purpose. I mean,
right, something that you want to do.
Roger, I absolutely had a blast having you on the show. What's the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you?
Well, you can learn more about my creative writing side at www.rogersippl.com, and emailing me is fine. I would be happy to hear from your listeners. As long as, you know, if you want some advice, that's fine too. I'll be happy to try to give you the best advice I can. But, you know, if I end up with 100 business plans in the email, it's, you know, if I see something that looks really great, I'll forward it to someone I know who invests in that kind of thing. But like I said, I'm not actively invested in new companies. But Roger, ROGER at SIPMAC.com. Roger at SIPMAC.com. Sierra India Papa Mike Alpha Charlie.com.
Roger, thank you so much for coming on. It was a blast.
Okay, well, I had a lot of fun too. Thanks for having me.